Welcome to the Financial Architects Podcast. I'm your host, Evan Makovsky, with partner and chief investment officer, Larry Steinberg. Larry, you have a big background in sports. You played 3 sports in high school, 2 in college, played club rugby until you were 35 and your daughter was born. Then you coached just about every one of your kids' sports. Where does your affinity for sports come from?
I think it's really genetic. My dad and his 2 brothers were super into sports. I remember as a kid, my uncle Bud, who would travel for business, he would go to a lot of sporting events. He kind of rose through the ranks from the bottom to being a CEO of an industrial paint company. And so he would go to these events, and I think it was designed around business. But when I was a kid, he would send me, and he had 3 daughters, right? So they weren't necessarily into sports like I was, but he would send me programs from the Final Four or the NCAA championships and all these different events he was at. He wouldn't go to a lot of Mizzou games because I have a lot of family members that went to Mizzou, and so I think it's just genetic, And I remember when my dad and his brothers would get together, they were always talking about sports, and it was, you remember the Ladue game. One of them went to Ladue and 2 of them went to Clayton High Schools in St. Louis, right? So they would talk about the Ladue game in 1940 whatever or 50 whatever, and they were always talking about sports, and so I just think it's genetic. I think Steinbergs love sports. I think that's just a reality of it, and so. And I wasn't necessarily a great athlete. I, grew late and was always a littler kid and kind of had to fight, but I always loved it and wanted to be good. And I was outworked and hustled everybody else. And that didn't always necessitate getting into playing time. And that's also why I kind of gravitated to team sports, because team sports, you could be maybe smarter and not be the best athlete and still fight, get your way on the field, get your way on the court. I started playing tennis when I was younger, and I kept on getting beat by this one kid who was a year younger than me and half my size. He kind of drove me out of tennis. His name was Michael Chang. So, it kind of made sense that he was that much better than me. But when you're a little kid, all you understand is this kid a year younger than you and tiny is just destroying you all over the court. And I'm like, yeah, I have no future in tennis. So after that, I kind of really stuck to the team sports. And it was basketball, baseball, football was it for me, right? And I just loved, I just wanted to win. I liked the team atmosphere. I liked being around the guys. It gave me a social way to belong. I wasn't necessarily the best at making friends, but sports gave me an outlet where I could do that, right? And where I could perform well and be popular based on me being an athlete, right? So even though I was not a star athlete, I was on the team, and that helped me in my social circle. It was important for my social development. So sports and team sports has always just been integral for me, probably from, kindergarten on. And it was just always a big deal. And a lot of my life was based around it. And so I think there's a genetic component and there's a social component. Sports was really big in San Diego, still is. All of the sports, the parents are very supportive, sometimes in a positive, not always positive way. You remember two dads getting in a fight at one of my Little League games when I was a kid. So they took sports really seriously, and the dads were really invested in their kids' sports, and I took a lot out of that, and I learned a lot from it. And that's where it really comes from. I think was just a genetic component and a social component of where I grew up in San Diego, and it's really affected me throughout my entire life, and it has been probably one of, if not the most important tenets of my life is being around sports and having that be, kind of a key element for me.
How has your love of sports affected you in business?
I think it's been dramatic, and I'll tell you why. I learned as I was growing up about the importance of team, right? In our high school team, it was, little me, big team, right? It was, it was always about the team and being the team's success. And so when I, kind of was evolving out of college, and after college, I was still playing rugby. I played club rugby, like you said, till I was 35 years old, right? And I was, the president of the club, and I was very active, involved, and that was important for me. But I learned, I think, more playing 2 sports in college that has helped me in business than I did in the classroom. Right. And there's a lot of key tenets of team. And then this is one thing you see in sports today why there's good coaches and bad coaches and good teams and bad teams, is that you really in a team have to find your place and where you can contribute to the team. You got to put the team first. It's about the team success and not individual success. And also, I learned a lot coaching, right? One of the things I used to hear, and now I understood when I was coaching all my kids' sports, is that you have to put take the player you have and put him in the best spot for the team, right? And I remember coaching baseball. I had a number of times would have issues with parents where they're like, little Johnny wants to play catcher or little Johnny wants to play shortstop. And I'm like, this is Little League. All the kids are going to play all the positions. Like, we do not know at age 8 or 10 or 12, like, if they're going pro and at what position. And all the kids deserve to get experience. They're all going to practice. And, if you want your kid to play shortstop, all 6 innings or 4 innings when they were younger, that I'm not the coach for you, because like every kid's going to play in the outfield. And oh, by the way, every kid that shows up at pitcher catcher practice is going to get a chance to pitch in the game, right? Because it's not about winning. It was about developing these kids for later on. And frankly, if, winning a Little League championship is going to be a big, important thing in your life, you have bigger problems than that. I actually remember one of the greatest documentaries I ever saw was about 20 years ago on PBS. And it was following all of these kids from a Little League team that had won the Little League World Series. And the thing that was really insightful to me was a lot of these guys were talking about how that was the highlight of their life, right? The highlight of your life at age 12 and 13 is not a good thing. You should aspire and do better things down the life. You shouldn't peak in middle school, right? And so that helped me in coaching, which was that I want to develop these players and I want them to get better. And I used to say in the first practice, I talked to the parents, I want these kids to get better at baseball, but I also want them to have fun, but I also want them to learn how to be a teammate and how to be a better person. And that's important to me. And that's stuck with me the whole time. And that's literally from watching John Wooden tapes. And, when YouTube was great, you could go out and watch different coaches and what they said and what they did. And I actually got pretty good at firing people up, but also pretty good at like when you had to like criticize and how to do it and to have that right balance of positive and negative. And that's exactly what I have to do in business, right? One of the things I have the most pride in is across the different businesses I'm involved with, we have really good teams, right? And that may mean that like, somebody, you get a chance to get a really good person and you don't necessarily have a position for them, you create one, right? Because they're going to be an asset and you give them opportunities. When we set up our investment advisory firm, the back office firm, we were leaving another firm and we grabbed one of their best persons and she's great. She still is great. And we got her versus a whole bunch of other companies. And why? Because she didn't want to spend her whole life in operations. She wanted to work in marketing as well. So we said, yes, of course. Like if you come work with us, we're going to have you work in marketing. And she's been really good there, right? And so she's, multifaceted and, because we wanted somebody with talent. We wanted to give her opportunities to grow as a person and to get better and to do other things. And that's why we have her. And our operation, and I hope she's not watching this because then she'll ask for a raise. But, she's integral. We could not operate without her. And not just on the operations side, but on the marketing side too. And she gets things done. And frankly, she probably works a little too hard. I occasionally will be getting, internal text messages from her on 10 o'clock on Saturday night. And I'm like, you should be out with your boyfriend doing something fun. Go. Don't, I sent you the message to deal with Monday. Just because I'm working doesn't mean you have to, right? So I really think that the team approach has been a fundamental facet in business for me. It has allowed me to accomplish things that I couldn't have done without, using that. And as you can tell, I get really fired up about sports and the sporting approach to things and building teams and having the best team. And I don't necessarily want all the best players. I want the best team. One of my favorite movies is that hockey movie about when they won the Olympics and, he turned down a bunch of better players because he wanted the players that would fit best together. That's my approach.
So now take me into the office, what you just did about the team approach in sports with colleagues, but how does it benefit as well your clients?
Well, I think it benefits my clients because we get things done, right? People don't worry about stepping on other people's toes. Like if something can't get done and somebody's not available, somebody else will step up and get it done. Certain things will go out that need to get done. It'll go out to 3 different people within the team and they'll coordinate and make sure it gets done because if one's not available, somebody else does. It also gives us, I think, the ability for people to be willing to take risks, right? In small business, making a mistake isn't as big a deal as something getting ignored, right? And we're not necessarily small by in certain metrics, but we're not, S&P 500 companies. We don't have 10,000 employees, but we get things done, and things, there's no perfect, things do slip through the cracks, but it really doesn't, because people are empowered to go make decisions and go do things. And that's also about sports. It's like, okay, right, somebody isn't having a good game, they're off that day, somebody else has to step up, right? In business, you need the same thing. Somebody's off, they're not doing good, they got other stuff going on in their lives, may have a personal issue they're having to deal with. Somebody else will step up and get it done. And that's no different than happens on a basketball, baseball, football, soccer, or wherever you want to put it, field. Somebody's not doing well, somebody else steps up. That has been instrumental and hugely, and I think it's a huge benefit to our clients, because people are looking for ways to make everything better for them. They're not worried about, I don't want to get in trouble.
It's definitely interesting for sure, and how you talk about how somebody will pick up the slack at Financial Architects. If one employee is tied up, somebody else will do it right away. Are you teaching your kids about the team approach? They're both competitive athletes. It has to be part of how you parent, especially as a single parent.
Absolutely. In fact, it's been, it was difficult for me when I first got divorced, because I was following kind of the role model of my then ex-wife, right? And I kind of realized it wasn't working with my kids, and I needed to have a different approach. And I didn't necessarily was able to model my own divorced parents' behavior. So I went out and looked at people I knew, including some clients who had really successful, good kids, and kind of figured out what they did. But one thing I saw was that, the guys that had sports backgrounds seemed to do really well with their kids, not just because their kids did sports and learned those lessons, but they were teaching them the lessons of sports, right? I was teaching them, I taught my kids, and it's paying off now, especially with my daughter, who's an amazing individual at 20 years old, that, you got to have compromise in you. It can't always be about you. You're not the center of, as my kid, you're not the center of the universe. And, there's going to be situations where, like, I'm supposed to be doing something with you, but I got to take a phone call from a client, or there's something going on. And that's not because I don't value you. It's because that issue is a crisis issue. Like, I'm not taking a phone call when I'm with my kids, especially when they were younger, if it's somebody to say hi or something like that. But if I've got a business issue that has to get dealt with because, to solve a problem for my clients, and that's especially true during tax time, where things get a little crazy. And also the fourth quarter of the year, like we're in right now, where there's a lot of tax planning and work that has to get done in a short period of time. But then my kids kind of understood that. And in fact, I would always tell my kids, clients put food on the table. And I still remember this. I think my daughter was in 6th grade and my son was in 3rd, and we're at Vons, the grocery store, and we run into a couple of my clients, right? And my daughter asked the clients, right? She goes, do you like working with my daddy? Do you like having my dad as your financial advisor? And they said, yes, very much so. And then the next thing she said was, well, thank you for putting food on our table. Yeah, she said it. I mean, it showed that she listened, And so, and part of that was they understood that, like, okay, if you're on a team, sometimes people have to get things done. You can't be the center of the universe. My kids are very unselfish, which is good. Sometimes too unselfish. Sometimes I have to tell them that it's all right in situations to be more, looking out for themselves and wanting to make sure they're taken care of too. So really, I think it's been instrumental in helping me, especially as a single parent, where, you don't always have another person to pass it off with. And it also allowed me to feel really okay about partnering up with other parents when my kids were little. It's like, all right, you can't get your kids to someplace my kids got to go. We'll pick them up along the way. And occasionally I had other parents that used to, we would work together as a team, and like, okay, we can't always get our kids to the same things. I would have early morning business meetings, and I would drop my kids off at another friend's house, and they would take them to school, so that, because you can't drop your kids off at school an hour and a half before school starts, right? So I learned that team approach and that partnering and that working together in my parenting. And I think that it was hugely successful. And I'm not going to count my kids as successes yet. I think they're on their way, but I kind of think that helped ground me and do that, to get them to the place where they are, where they're doing well.
Before we get out of here, I got one for you. What's worse, tearing your ACL on the basketball court or losing 25% of your portfolio in 2 weeks in the stock market?
The answer to that question would be
ACLs are not that bad anymore. Medicine's gotten better. Remember that.
Actually, it's funny because a buddy of mine who we were just doing some business meetings together between his and our business, and I dropped him off at his house, and our kids are on the same baseball team, and he texted me that, like, can I bring this kid back from the baseball game because he blew out his knee, and it was a torn ACL. So, no. Actually, I think the answer to that question is going to be your mental status. Which one is going to keep you more sleepless? I think that, first of all, doing the alternative investments and all that is going to prevent you from having that kind of downside. But if you're mentally okay that with an aggressive position and know it could drop 25% and it doesn't bother you, then that one is not as bad. And if you're somebody that's used to working out every day and now can't, psychologically, that's going to be more difficult. And the psychological and the mental side of things is really important. One of the things I say is I help people sleep through the night through these turbulent financial times. And so it's going to be an individual decision based on how that person is wired. And so, and regardless of either situation, I'm going to try to help them, like I am with my buddy right now, try to help him get through the situation. And he's a client as well. So like psychologically deal with, a guy that's used to working out every day who's now hobbling around and is going to be, it's been a few months and he's, had the surgery and he's getting better, but it really is painful to him. He can't work out,
Well, well done with my curveball right there. I don't know if you used to hit
I was pretty good at hitting the curve because I knew that as soon as you recognize the curve, what do? You pause and you stay back, right? You don't get out over your front foot. My son's gotten pretty good at that recently. He never used to hit a curveball until last year, and now he can crush the curveball and take it to the opposite field because he once again pauses, draws back, and waits on it. Right?
Good comparisons for sure here to the world of finance and business and sports and the lessons that you learned and hearing about your youth both in St. Louis and San Diego. So that's going to wrap things up for this episode of the Financial Architects podcast. Thanks to Chief Investment Officer and Partner Larry Steinberg. I'm your host, Evan Makovsky, and we will see you on the next episode.